Okay, so we've talked about why the US got involved with the Gulf of Tonkin and whether or not we thought that was an acceptable reason to go to war. Today, we're going to focus a little bit more on the methods that we used in Vietnam and whether or not those methods were acceptable. As a reminder, during the Ed Puzzle, you'll be asked to answer questions, but you should also make sure that you're taking notes. And remember, I'm not concerned about you copying the slide. I want you to put it in your own words and make sure that you're adding information beyond what you see on the slide. So, things that I'm talking about, examples, etc. So this is just a reminder of the geography of where we're talking about. So in Vietnam, we are focused mainly here in the southern portion of the country. Remember that the northern part of Vietnam is communist under Ho Chi Minh, and we're trying to hold the south to prevent South Vietnam from falling to communism as well. There's a couple of different groups that sometimes confuse students, so I just want to take a second to recap the groups and how they relate to our involvement. So on the far left, you'll see the term Viet Cong. They're also referred to as the VC. These were communist supporters in South Vietnam. So we're fighting with the VC in the South. The South isn't communist yet, but there are communist supporters. So those are the people that we're trying to prevent from gaining control in the South. The Viet Minh, the center group, is the communist faction in the North that supports Ho Chi Minh. So Ho Chi Minh is the communist leader in North Vietnam. The Viet Minh are his group of forces in North Vietnam. And then we also have the South Vietnamese soldiers, which are also called the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or you can see the acronym there, ARVN. So this is the group that the US military sought to train when we sent advisors early on, and then these are the troops that we are fighting side by side when we escalate the war. And then this is also the group that we're hoping will continue to fight off communism once we leave. So we can't really evaluate our methods without knowing what our goals are. We know our foreign policy at the time is containment, which, just as a reminder, it's not written there for you, but containment is trying to prevent the spread of communism. So in Vietnam, we're trying to prevent communism from spreading to South Vietnam. Our strategy is really focused on this idea of a war of attrition, which just means wearing somebody down. Our somebody is the Viet Cong. So we're hoping that through continual harassment in the South, we can basically break their spirit and then they'll give in. My brother has always been super amazing at a war of attrition with my parents, constantly asking and nagging and asking and nagging until they finally give in. Same idea, just with communist guerrillas in South Vietnam. We also were trying to win the hearts and minds of the South Vietnamese. So we want the South Vietnamese to view the US as the good guys and to side with us as opposed to siding with the VC and the communists. So we'll need to keep these goals in mind as we look at our methods to see how effective we think the methods will be in helping us achieve these goals. Vietnam was a very difficult war for us. It was a different kind of war than we'd fought. The United States is very good at traditional type wars. So things like World War One, World War Two, we have a very clear enemy. We are able to use all of our amazing like military technologies like tanks and helicopters and aircrafts and all those sorts of things to help us win the war. None of that applied in Vietnam. First, the type of fighting that the VC are using is called guerrilla warfare, which basically means that they aren't clearly identifiable like enemies. So think in World War II, we knew who the bad guys were because the Nazis like wore little swastikas on their uniforms. So it was very easy to identify based on their uniforms who we were supposed to be shooting at. They didn't do that in South Vietnam. The VC looked like everybody else. They didn't have uniforms. They didn't have any kind of identification that would lead us to believe that they were, in fact, the enemy. They looked like all of the other civilians in the area. Guerrilla warfare also uses hit and run and ambush tactics. So, what our soldiers would experience would be they'd be doing their patrols through the jungle, and then all of a sudden there would be sniping that they couldn't identify the direction of, and then it would stop. They'd be done. So, there weren't a lot of really big battles. Like Kaisan, and in some areas there were longer kind of traditional like firefights, but for the most part it's this kind of hit and run, like ambush and dip types of attacks, which we weren't used to fighting. So this isn't a traditional war for us, which makes it difficult for us to fight. So these images kind of just emphasize that point of the elusive enemy. Like, who is the enemy? Like, any number of these people could have been VC or could have been aiding and abetting or helping the Viet Cong. And we had no way of knowing, which, if you think about from a soldier's perspective, would be super unnerving. Like, you don't know who's going to try to kill you or who you're trying to stop because there's no way to identify who the enemy truly is. In addition to not knowing who the enemy was, the fighting was very difficult because of the geography of Vietnam. Think about where we fought wars previously. So, World War I and World War II were in Europe. Civil War and Revolutionary War were in North America. Uh, those are similar types of locations. Vietnam is jungle. We've not successfully fought a war in a jungle up until this point. So, the jungle terrain causes a lot of issues for us. One, you can see in the picture on the left, it's extremely dense foliage. So those like amazing tanks we have, yeah, not going to do anything here. Helicopters, cool. You can't see anything if you're flying above the tree canopy. So a lot of what we'd relied on in the past for military technology just simply wasn't going to work here because of the geography. It was also extremely hot. Soldiers would literally die from heat exposure in the jungle. There were monsoons. It was wet and like decaying uh, foliage everywhere. Like, it was a very difficult environment to fight in. And our soldiers would spend an entire year in Vietnam during their tour of duty. Some of the techniques that the VC used in their fighting included booby traps, which you can see in the center and the far right picture. So the center picture is a punji trap. So they would dig a pit, put sharpened bamboo stakes in the bottom of it, and then cover it with like a mat or like leaves and dirt so you couldn't see it. And then when you walked on it, you would fall through the covering and then be impaled by the sharpened bamboo sticks at the bottom. Um, they would sometimes put like feces, like human feces, on the ends of the punji sticks so that as it went into your leg, for example, so with the poop, and then that would cause really, really bad infections. So you're probably not going to die immediately from falling into a punji trap, but you are going to be really hard to get out of that jungle, and you'll probably ultimately die from some sort of infection. On the far right, you can see a door trap. So that apparatus in front of the guy would be pulled back, and then when he would open the door, it would fly forward. You can see the spikes sticking out of the cross beams. So then that would hit you like, chest, stomach, thighs, or legs. And then there's landmines everywhere, tripwires. I mean, so the soldiers were on edge constantly because of this kind of fighting. It's like you don't know when you're going to hit a landmine or trip a wire or stumble upon a booby trap. So it was a very psychologically stressful war for the soldiers as well. So in terms of how this is different for than what we're like, prepared for, this isn't a war like any war we've ever fought. We don't know how to fight well this way. Our troops had to like really kind of figure it out while they were there. And we come up with some strategies to try to deal with the difficulties that we're facing in this war, which we'll get to. In addition to all that, the VC had an interconnected system of tunnels in the jungle. So Not only do we not know who the enemy is, but they can literally travel underground from place to place and then use that to help with the ambushes. They had whole like areas underground with places for supplies or to treat the wounded. Like they have this really complex system of tunnels. You can see in the pictures that's Miss Plew at her semester at sea when she was in college. So you can see they had these tunnels that you could actually go into. Now, I don't know if you know Miss Plew, but she's about 5'2", maybe. She's petite person, and you can see how small the tunnels were, how small the openings were. But the VC used this to kind of get around the jungle, and it made it even harder for us to locate and defeat the enemy. So our military adapts because they have to. The problems we've already talked about on the left side, we don't know who the enemy is, and the jungle landscape made it very difficult for us to fight. So we come up with a couple of solutions to try to fix this. One is search and destroy missions. So since we can't easily identify the enemy, the military decides that we're going to search the villages and try to root out either the VC and or people or villagers that are housing them or providing aid to the VC. To deal with the jungle issue, we have two approaches. One is napalm, which is a gasoline based bomb. The way napalm works is when the bomb explodes, it like sprays out this like kind of jelly like substance which sticks to everything and then it ignites, so it creates this like fire bomb or fireball, which I'll show you some images of in just a second. And then the second way that we tried to deal with the jungle was through Agent Orange, which was a herbicide, so like a chemical that was sprayed on the jungle to kill the plants to make the jungle not so much of an issue anymore. So we'll look at each of these and look at some of the impacts. Here's some images of actual search and destroy missions. So they would do things called Zippo raids, where if they found a village that they suspected was helping the Viet Cong, they would burn the village to the ground. So you can see in three of those pictures, the villages are in flames, or the guy in the middle has got a flamethrower that he's using to burn the village to the ground. The picture on the right, you can see a woman and a child in the doorway of one of the huts with a U.S. Marine walking by. This is challenging because on the one hand we can't figure out who the enemy is, but then on the other hand we're trying to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese and like burning down their villages. So I don't know. I feel like those two things don't go together so much. I don't know what the solution would have been, but it was a difficult situation for the Marines because they couldn't find the enemies, but then we're also trying to keep the South Vietnamese on our side. Here's some pictures of napalm. So in the center picture, you can see the plane dropping it, and then on the pictures in the top right and left, you can see the fire explosion from the bomb. So these are really large, like destructive weapons, not like the A bomb, like we talked about in World War II, but you can see that it would cause a lot of damage. You can also see in two of those pictures that they're being dropped on villages. The bottom two pictures are victims of these napalm uh, like attacks. So in the bottom right, you can see a woman carrying a baby out of a village that had been naped. You can see the baby's clothes are like charred to his skin. And then on the left, you can see the scars on the woman's back. So again, we go back to that idea of like the war is hard to fight because of the jungle. So cool, let's burn the jungle. But then you're also trying to win the hearts and minds of the people by burning down the jungle. So the goals seem to be at odds with one another with the methods. The third method was Agent Orange. So on the map on the left, you can see areas where Agent Orange was dropped. Again, this is that chemical that is like a kills the plants. The bottom right hand corner you'll notice there's a black box in that smaller map, which shows what the map is focusing on in the larger portion. So this is just in South Vietnam. We actually did not use Agent Orange in North Vietnam, just in the South. The red portions on the map show where Agent Orange was sprayed, and then you can see in the charts or graphs on the left how many missions we had where we sprayed Agent Orange and other herbicides, and then how many gallons were sprayed. So, for example, in 1967, over 5 million gallons of Agent Orange were sprayed in South Vietnam that year. In total, the US sprayed over 20 million gallons of Agent Orange in South Vietnam. In the center, you can see a before and after picture. So the before picture shows like a mangrove area. So you can see along the river there, it's like covered in foliage. And then I believe it was sprayed with Agent Orange in 1967. And then this picture was, the bottom one was taken a couple of years later. So you can see there's nothing left. Like there's no more greenery in that area. And then on the far right, you can see the planes dropping or spraying the Agent Orange. So it was like a crop duster kind of thing where they would just spray the whole area. There's a lot of issues with Agent Orange. Agent Orange contains a very toxic chemical called dioxin, which causes very serious health issues. And the civilians, as well as U.S. Marines, were in these jungles where Agent Orange was dropped. So we have veterans, Vietnam vets, who experienced health issues as a result of the government using Agent Orange. And we see very significant impacts on the South Vietnamese people. So some of the issues that the South Vietnamese faced was that because there was so much used, that 20 million gallons in the course of a couple of years, the chemical found its way into their soil and into their water supply. So that means that their like food and water contains this chemical. So it's not like they just had it dropped on them, but they're consuming dioxin in their soil and in their water. So what we have found is that dioxin is linked to a variety of issues like stillbirths, which means that a woman carries the baby to term. And then when she has the baby is not alive. Birth defects, so many different kinds of cancer. And then also severe psychological and neurological disorders. So the pictures that I've included, and there's a ton of them, they're all very disturbing, but you can see the different types of birth defects that these children were born with. Now, these children were not a part of the Vietnam War. They were born after the fact. So we've seen that even third generation Vietnamese are still experiencing consequences of the use of Agent Orange during Vietnam. So you can see that there's like a spinal deformity with the boy in the upper right. You can see that the boy in the upper left, arms did not fully develop. And then the children in the bottom, you can see the boy kind of laying in the foreground. He has a joint issue. So a lot of times you'll see joints that are like backwards or that won't straighten. And there's all kinds of issues with the way that the bones developed. You also see a number of children being sent to orphanages because they have these issues and their parents just simply don't have the means to provide the care needed for the children that are experiencing these things. There's also people that are, they're blind or deaf or can't speak. So that would be more along the neurological issues or the, brain development issues. So there's a lot of concern over the use of Agent Orange and the long-term consequences of using that particular approach to deal with the difficulty of the jungle. So there'll be a couple questions for you to respond to at the end here to kind of think about or synthesize the approach and the goals and whether or not ultimately you think our actions were justified in Vietnam.